The laughter hit her before the sun did. 7 men stood in a loose half-circle on the gravel yard, pointing, doubling over, slapping each other's shoulders like she was the punchline of a joke nobody had bothered to write yet. She stood alone across from them, spine straight, jaw tight, eyes locked somewhere past their heads. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. But inside, something cracked, quiet and small, like ice under a boot. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Her name was Mara Quinn, and she had wanted this for as long as she could remember wanting anything. Not the uniform, not the title, the proving. She had grown up the only girl in a house of brothers who told her, gently and often, that some doors just weren't built for her. She had spent 6 years deciding they were wrong. Now she stood on a training yard 300 miles from home, the newest face in a unit that hadn't asked for her and didn't want her. The men laughing weren't cruel by nature. Most men like this rarely are. They were certain she'd wash out, certain she'd cry, or quit, or both, certain that her presence was a mistake someone above them would eventually correct. She had heard it all before. You won't last a week. You don't belong here. This isn't a place for soft hands. The words rolled off her like rain off canvas. Or so she told herself. But late at night, alone in her bunk, she let herself wonder, just once, if they were right. That morning, dust hung gold in the early light, drifting lazy between the buildings like the air itself hadn't decided what was about to happen. Somewhere a generator hummed. Boots crunched gravel. And then, cutting through the men's laughter, came a sound that silenced them instantly. A low, sharp bark, followed by the click of claws on stone. The dog came around the corner like he owned the yard. Aslan was a legend before he was a memory. A Belgian Malinois who had outlasted 3 handlers, survived 2 deployments, and earned a reputation for trusting almost no one. He did not warm to strangers. He did not perform for applause. The unit's own commanding officer had been growled at more than once. Aslan answered to instinct, not rank. He walked straight past the 7 laughing men without so much as a glance. The laughter died in their throats. Aslan stopped in front of Mara, sat, and lifted one paw, not toward her hand, but toward her face, resting it gently against her cheek the way you'd comfort someone who didn't yet know they needed comforting. The yard went silent except for the wind moving dust across the gravel and the distant flutter of a flag against its pole. She thought he'd bare his teeth at her, like he had at everyone else. She was wrong. Mara's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she raised it, slow, uncertain, and rested it against the dog's vest, against the worn patches stitched there from missions she couldn't begin to imagine. The men behind her had gone still as stone. Nobody pointed now. Nobody laughed. One soldier, the one who'd laughed loudest, took a half-step forward, brow furrowed, like a man recalculating something he'd been certain of for years. "He's never done that," he said, voice low, almost reverent. Not for anyone. Mara didn't answer right away. She was caught somewhere between disbelief and a feeling she hadn't let herself have in months. Being seen. Not as the new recruit. Not as the woman who didn't belong. Just as someone worth trusting. But trust, she knew, is a strange and heavy gift. It asks something of you in return. As Aslan leaned his weight gently into her side, she felt the full size of what was being placed in her hands. Not affection, but responsibility. The kind of responsibility the men around her had spent years earning, and she was being handed in a single, breathless moment. Was it fair? Some in that circle would wonder, quietly, for days afterward, whether a dog's instinct should outweigh months of doubt, whether trust earned in seconds meant as much as trust earned in years. It was a question without an easy answer, and it sat uneasily in the dust long after the moment passed. Then, slowly, the dog sat back on his haunches, lifted his head, and held still, poised, alert, almost ceremonial, the closest thing to a salute a dog could give. The yard held its breath. And then, one by one, the men who had laughed loudest fell quiet, and something in their faces shifted, not surrender exactly, but recognition. The soldier who'd spoken first stepped forward and offered his hand, not as a joke this time, but as an apology that needed no words. Mara shook it. Her hand had stopped trembling. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes in a single unguarded moment that changes how a room sees you forever. She had walked onto that yard alone, carrying doubt she never spoke aloud. She walked off it that evening as something else entirely, not because she had proven anything to the men who doubted her, but because something far wiser than pride had simply known the truth about her all along. If this story moved you, tell us where you're watching from and what it stirred in you. We read every comment, and we'd love for you to subscribe so you never miss the next story of courage finding its way home.